Tonight on Connecticut's news station, it's back to the polls in Bridgeport to finally decide on the city's mayor. We have live team coverage tracking the race.
Plus, the jury begins deliberations in the Michelle Trones case. A look at where the trial stands as we await a verdict.
Plus, a Connecticut pastor is accused of selling meth out of his church. Now he's back in police custody. We're getting an update on the additional charges he's facing.
Now at 6, this is Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us here on the Fox 61 News at 6. I'm Sarah Sanchez.
And I'm Keith McGilver, the only station live and local through 7 p.m. After a month of testimony, hundreds of pieces of evidence, and dozens of witnesses in the Michelle Trones trial, it is time for the jury to deliberate.
Each side wrapped up its case with closing arguments this afternoon. Fox 61's Julia LeBlanc has been in the courtroom from the very beginning, covering the course of this trial. She has the very latest for us now.
Jennifer is dead, and Fotis and Michelle Trones intended that to happen.
Assistant State's Attorney Michelle Manning getting one last chance to speak directly to jurors, passing the baton to the 6 people now left to decide the fate of Michelle Trones, the once girlfriend of Fotis Dulos.
Fotis Dulos needed help to commit that murder. He needed an alibi. He needed the defendant.
Prosecutors allege Fotis killed his wife, Jennifer Dulos, at her home in New Canaan on May 24, 2019. They say Trones went with him to Hartford to dump the evidence and later helped clean the Toyota Tacoma, which they say was used while committing the crime. The state pointed to the hours of interviews with Trones when her account of what she says they did that day changed several times they say she was lying.
If that's really the case, she has memory lapses, she has false implanted memories, she doesn't speak the language. If that's really what's going on, why is she so good on details that don't matter? And so bad on details that incriminate her?
Prosecutors pointed to the evidence laid out over the last month, evidence they say couldn't be a coincidence.
Is it just a coincidence that the defendant's DNA was found on the opening of a garbage bag that also contained bloodstains, tape, and Jennifer Dulos' DNA? Are all these things just coincidences, or is the defendant guilty?
But defense attorney John Schoenhorn argues that evidence is all circumstantial and pure speculation.
There is nothing to suggest that Michelle had any clue about what was going to happen in New Canaan on May 24th, 2019. More importantly, there's nothing to suggest that Michelle would even think that Fotis was capable of doing anything like that. Again, Michelle simply did not know.
And when it comes to motive, Schoenhorn says there isn't one. With things starting to turn in Fotis' favor in the custody case the month Jennifer went missing. He says his client was looking at the light at the end of the tunnel and even considering moving to Colorado to get away from it all.
Why at that moment would Michelle agree to risk her life, risk her daughter's entire family life, to at that point say, I think we now want to get rid of Jennifer Dulos? It doesn't make sense. It's pure speculation.
Schoenhorn also offering different possibilities with other people being involved other than his client.
This trial is a tragedy, no question about it. It is a tragedy for many people, including people that are sitting here in this audience, in this courtroom right now. But this case here is not about sympathy, and it's not about antipathy and revenge. There is only speculation and no facts. We are all sitting here in hindsight, deciding what happened after the fact, what one should have known versus did know.
After closing arguments, the judge spent about an hour instructing the jury before they retired into the deliberation room. Now that process will continue tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. We're in Stamford. Julia LeBlanc, Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
To politics now tonight. Bridgeport voters heading back to the polls again in a special election. The race for mayor. This is the 4th time voters will cast their ballots. Last year, the court ordered a redo because of suspected ballot fraud. We have all angles covered tonight. Fox 61's Jake Garcia in Bridgeport with more on what incumbent Mayor Joe Ganem's campaign is up to tonight. Jake.
Well, Keith and Sarah, it has been a long journey for Mayor Joe Ganim. You'll remember that shortly after last fall's primary, that's when video surfaced showing some Ganim supporters allegedly putting multiple absentee ballots into state ballot boxes across the city. Now, that led to his opponent, John Gomes, filing a lawsuit, which ultimately led Ganim to take the stand, testifying that he had no knowledge of any of the alleged fraud. Now, the judge in that case ordered this new round of special elections, which took lots of planning by both campaigns and the Secretary of the State's office. Secretary Stephanie Thomas said earlier today that while she's concerned about voter fatigue, she's still optimistic for a good voter turnout.
There certainly is some voter fatigue happening, but on the other side of the coin, you know, a lot of people say they believe in voting in every election. So even if it has to be redone, they go back and vote. So we'll see what the numbers show at the end of the day.
Now, over the last few weeks, Ganim has gained some momentum campaigning on the progress made in Bridgeport since he was first elected. And just last week, he secured some key endorsements from some of the state's top officials like Governor Ned Lamont and Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysowitz. Now, Ganim's team has been stressing to voters that this is not an election to sit out on, that it's very important that they have their voices heard. Our team coverage continues tonight on this special election here in Bridgeport with Fox 61's Matt Karen, who's live at just one of those polling locations across the city. Matt?
Well, Jake, picking up where you left off, you know, it's interesting. John Gomes is actually wearing those endorsements that you mentioned by Mayor Ganim and top Democratic state party officials as a badge of honor. Gomes is saying that an endorsement of Joe Ganim is really an endorsement of fraud and corruption. It is hard, however, to see the path to victory for John Gomes. After all, he has lost 3 rounds of voting before. But he's also reminding voters that the only reason we've even had 3 rounds of voting is due to a judge finding supporters of Mayor Ganim committing absentee ballot fraud. Now, we asked Gomes a few minutes ago during our live interview at 5 o'clock why he thinks this round of voting will be any different.
Well, unlike the last primary, where many of my supporters, their party affiliation were changed, so they couldn't vote in the Democratic primary. In 2 schools alone, I had over 40 people turned away, and they came and made complaints directly. This is now about all parties. It's not about Republican, Independent, unaffiliated, or Democrat. It's about every party putting their party differences aside and coming together to vote for that one Bridgeport. That's the difference.
So Gomes will be trying to woo key independent, unaffiliated, and Republican voters to the polls. The question is, are there enough of them in Bridgeport to actually make a difference? And will those voters be motivated to even show up? After all, there has been a lot of voter disenfranchisement. We're going to also continue to monitor any issues at polling places here in Bridgeport, whether those are issues that are happening inside for the in-person vote or the famous absentee ballots, or even city council people getting arrested. After all, quite frankly, we have seen it all here in Bridgeport. We're live outside the Thomas Hooker School. Matt Karen, Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
All right, thank you, Matt. Turning to the weather now, a warm winter day outside.
Yeah, I turned into a human coat rack, Uncle Keith, for my 5 nieces and nephews. They would not keep them on, Rachel. The question is, will it? I think they outsmarted me. They listened to you. Perhaps I didn't.
There you go. And they are not going to need a jacket tomorrow, but they will need an umbrella on their way out the door. We've got winter weather whiplash. Temperatures tomorrow in the 50s again, but by Thursday, we're in the 30s. We don't go from 50s to 30s without some of Mother Nature's fireworks. So we could actually hear a rumble of thunder as we head into tomorrow night. We've got strong gusty winds and locally heavy rain. We could see gusts up to 50 miles per hour. Keep in mind, this wind advisory starts at 7 o'clock tomorrow night and continues into 7 a.m. on Thursday. So it's really going to be around this time tomorrow night and later that we start to hear those winds whip even more. Right now, temperatures are still close to 50 degrees, which is wild. We've got some rain that is just now starting to approach Connecticut, and that rain will be the start of a wet stretch over the next 24 hours. It'll come down off and on through the overnight and right into the day tomorrow. We'll talk more about the rain in store, how much we could get, and how the chill that returns doesn't return for long. Your full forecast coming up, guys.
All right. right, new tonight, police searching for the person who hit and killed a 25-year-old man in Vernon. Police saying the man was hit in the area of Elm and Thompson Streets. They say the driver of that car ran from the scene. It was breaking news we brought you in the 5 o'clock hour. The road now closed as police continue to investigate.
A pastor accused of selling crystal meth out of his church has been rearrested. Herbert Miller was due in court last week, but left before his case was heard. Police took him into custody yesterday at his home. Miller is being held on a $100,000 bond for failure to appear. He was first arrested when police say he had meth in both rock and liquid form. Miller is a reverend at the United Methodist Church in Woodbury.
An update now on breaking news we first brought you in the Fox 61 Morning News. We learn now that more than 24 people have been displaced after 2 fires in 2 Connecticut cities. The first happening in Hartford, where crews responded to a multifamily home on Park Terrace. Angela Bovar was there in our 4 a.m. hour. The fire department saying 9 adults and 9 kids all displaced. Then a couple of hours later, this around 6 o'clock this morning in New Haven, flames breaking out at a multifamily building, this on the corner of Winthrop and Gilbert Avenue. Officials believe that fire started on the 3rd floor. 7 additional people displaced. The cause of both of these fires still under investigation. The sliver of good news in all of this, no injuries reported.
Fox 61 continues to celebrate Black History Month, and today the Lieutenant Governor visited Hat House in Hartford. Hat House is a Black-owned business. The Hat House by Brothers Johnson 1929 Hat Company mostly sells, well, obviously hats, but they also sell socks and ties. The company says the store is about something much bigger than just fashion because it focuses on Hartford's culture.
You can see with this one, we actually splashed a little extra Hartford culture on it from the Black History celebration that took place with the Urban League of Greater Hartford. They had this pin this year.
Oh, look at how cool is that?
The company was established in 2018 in memory of Dr. William M. Johnson, Jr., a man who wore many hats in fashion, faith, and fatherhood.